today's project, you're going to be needing a plain lampshade. You can find these at the thrift store for super cheap. This is just a plain white drum shade that I found. It's a little beat up, but that's okay because we're going to be covering it. I'm going to be using this sequin fabric to cover it. This is actually an old scarf that I had and it was just too itchy to wear, so I always figured I would turn it into something else. So the first thing I'm going to do is measure the largest part of my lampshade, and that's going to be the bottom. I believe it's about 14 inches across, the one that I'm working with. So I'm just going to measure all the way around and just see how much fabric I'm actually going to need to cut. And I'm actually going to give it an extra couple of inches. So now I'm going to take my tape measure and measure that out onto my fabric. And once I get to that point, I'm going to go ahead and cut it right there. Since I'm working with a more narrow piece of fabric, I'm not going to worry about trimming the top yet, but if you do have a larger piece, you can go ahead and trim it down to whatever size that you want so it's easier to work with. So right now, because these are sequins and when you cut it, they can be like kind of, cut in half or cut in pieces, I'm just going to go ahead and pluck some of those off. And after I make sure that the piece of fabric fits how I want it to on my shade, then I'm going to get my board up here and prep my work area. So what I'm doing is just using this board. I use this when I'm spray painting or using spray adhesive. So for this project, I'm using 3M77 spray adhesive. So I'm just going to go ahead and lay my fabric down with the pretty side down. So I'm going to be looking at the underside of the fabric or the back side and just spread that out. Make sure you put on your gloves because that spray adhesive is really sticky stuff. And then I'm just going to spray down across the bottom. I'm not going to worry too much about the top because that's going to be trimmed off later on. So I'm just focusing on where the lampshade is going to be. So right here at the seam of the lampshade, I'm just going to go ahead and start at the end of my fabric with that seam. I'm just going to set it down onto the fabric and press it down onto the fabric and then roll my lampshade. And as I'm rolling the lampshade, I'm focused on keeping the bottom edge very straight with the fabric. I'm not too worried about the top of the lampshade and what the top of the fabric's doing. I just want that bottom edge to be straight. I'm doing it this way because I want to be able to utilize that scalloped edge, which is just a really pretty stitching. But if you have just a regular piece of fabric that is cut on the edge, don't worry about it. You can always just fold it a couple of times and tuck it up under there, and you don't have to worry about if it's perfectly straight on the bottom or not. But since I have the scallop edge, I'm going to try to make it as clean as possible. So after smoothing out the fabric, just making sure there's no bumps, making sure it's very smooth against the lampshade, now I'm just prepping the seam. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this a little bit now that I have the fabric where I want it. I can see that there's a little excess fabric there, so I'm just going to go ahead and trim that off. Now I'm going to close off that seam, so I'm just going to take a little more of my spray adhesive and spray that right over the seam and go ahead and press down that last bit of fabric there and try to match it up, especially if there's a pattern, try to match them up so they kind of blend together. Now I'm finishing off the bottom part of the lampshade. This is where the scalloped end of the fabric is going to be. And sometimes this part of the lampshade is actually visible just on the inside trim. So I want to make sure that that trim is really pretty and smoothed out. So I'm just going to make sure that I make everything as straight as possible and keep it as good looking as possible. Here I'm working on the top of the lampshade, and now I'm taking off all of that excess fabric. So I'm going to trim all of that off. I'm going to trim it pretty close to the lampshade. I'm only leaving enough fabric to be able to wrap around that frame of the lampshade right on top there. So I'm just going to cut off all of this, and you can see some of those sequins flying there. Yeah, they pop off. A sequin fabric is a little bit different to work with, but I found if you're going to be making lampshades with it, this is an easy way to be able to do it. Here I'm just trimming the top edge a little bit more, just making sure it's as straight and even as possible. And now I'm using my spray adhesive, just spraying the very edge of that fabric. And I'm going to go ahead and pull it taut and wrap it around the inside of the lampshade frame. So I'm just pressing it down in there, just making sure that it's kind of hidden so you can't see any rough edges. So feel free to take your time on this part, and if you get any extra spray adhesive on the inside of the lampshade, you could just wipe that away before it dries. It wipes away pretty easily. So all I'm doing is just making sure that it has a nice clean kind of finished look on the inside, since the top inside of the lampshade is also seen as well. So it can be visible, so you want it to be just as pretty as the outside. Now I'm just finishing off spraying the last bit of spray adhesive, and I'm just going to go ahead and wipe that off because I got a little too much on there. Just finishing off the last section here, pulling the fabric taut and tucking it under that little bar that's on the inside of the frame. Now if there's any kind of cockeyed sequins, go ahead and just trim those off if they're getting in the way. And usually that'll just happen right where it's wrapped around or right at the edge of the fabric, so you can just kind of clean that up a bit and we're done. So that was it. That's all it takes to make a sequin lampshade. And they're so easy to recover, and you can find lampshades for really cheap at thrift stores. And here you can see the inside and how I wanted to have that straight. That's why, because it was going to be visible. So I just wanted to keep it kind of pretty, and it almost has sort of a lacy look in there. And then the top, I don't mind if there's a few kind of wonky sequins up there, it kind of gives it a fun look. We always use the low energy compact fluorescent light bulbs, but even though they don't put out very much heat, I still always make sure to let my lampshade dry overnight or even up to 24 hours. I just want to make sure that that glue is completely dry before using it. That way you know it's safe, it's no longer flammable, and you are good to go. Now it's just a matter of deciding what lamp to put your new lampshade on. I made this lampshade specifically for my room on this acrylic lamp. I found this at Walmart a long time ago and I just fell in love with it, and I thought that this would be a great kind of pop of glam to add to the room. But don't forget, you guys, you can recover a lampshade in just about any type of fabric, so you don't have to be making a sequin lampshade. It can be whatever you like. If you like floral print or paisley, whatever sort of colors you like, whatever matches your room and your style and your personal taste, go with that. So I hope you guys liked this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.